Well, welcome to the show, Reed. Really appreciate you being here. For everybody, this is Reed Goossens. He's coming in from over in California, local or not local, but originally from Australia. Wildhorn Captial. You're a co-founder of, correct?
That is correct, and thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So this is actually our first virtual or kind of Zoom. We were using StreamYard meeting and podcast. So great to have you on. We'll try to have this be our little experiment here.
Awesome.
But yeah, probably our audience might not exactly know who you are. If you kind of want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into real estate, whether that was in Australia or once you kind of came here to the US, and just, kind of your story leading up to what drew you into real estate, getting into commercial real estate, now being a bestseller.
Sure. Yeah. There's going to be a lot there, but I'll try and make it distill it down as much as possible. So, as you said, originally from Australia, I moved out to this country in 2012, and the reason I moved here was really to chase two loves. The one was the love of New York City, and the second one was the love of my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife. So, but I moved here really with just a dream to live in New York City and just be an expat. My background's in structural engineering. I had a W-2 job. Well, I didn't have a job when I moved yet, to find one, but it was really just to come be an expat for a couple of years in New York, live as a local would live, and then eventually move back to Australia. But before moving to the United States, I actually caught the bug of real estate investing through reading the book that I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard about, the Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I read that book back in beginning of 2010 after I'd returned from 2 years of traveling around the world, after I'd finished university in 2007, where I studied structural engineering. So really the lead up to moving to the United States was all self-education, found the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, really knew that I didn't want to be living in a cubicle for the rest of my life back in 2009, 2010. And that book really resonated with me. It sort of struck a chord. And so I went out and actively started learning about real estate. And at the time I was still in Australia, and I was learning about maybe do a fix and flip or a lease option or something. But then and spent those sort of 2010, 2011 learning. And then at the end of 2011, Erica, my now wife, she was in Australia studying, and her degree was over and she had to move back to America. And I said, hey, do you want to move to New York City? Because I want to live in New York City for a period of time and let's just give it a go, right? And she said, frick yeah, why not? She's originally from Los Angeles, and we packed up our sort of life in Australia. I quit my well-paying engineering job and moved to New York City, and didn't have a job lined up. Came on a tourist visa and pounded the pavements until I got a job. And moving in with this girl who was moving halfway across the world with this girl, and new relationships and trying to find a job. So it was quite stressful. But really, within 2 weeks of being fresh off the boat, I was at my first RIA, the Real Estate Investment Association's event. And I thought Australia had some pretty cool events, but my gosh, RIAs are just people listening to this show, you don't realize what you have here in America in terms of the access to information and those events and those organizations that, I think RIA is pretty much in every single major metro across the United States. We had none of that in Australia. We had a very small meetup group that was met in someone's, living room. And so, coming here was just like this eye-opening, going to these events and being surrounded by other people and, paying $20 at the door and getting some incredible information that you'd pay a guru $10,000 or $15,000 in Australia. So it was really a sense of, wow, I knew what I came from, and this is just incredible. So I was just, again, a sponge for the first 6 months of living in the United States, because that's sort of changed my brain in and around the US investing lingo. Like, I didn't even know what an LLC was, or I didn't even know what a credit score was. I didn't have any credit when I first moved here. But what I did realize was that, okay, New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they're all sort of very similar to the Australian market in terms of high appreciation markets. But then you had these secondary and tertiary markets that were very, very cheap. And I was like, hang on, you can buy a house for $50,000 and 4 hours away from New York City? Like, yes, sign me out. Where do I go do that? And so from there, within 6 months of moving to America, I had bought my first property. And my whole story and my whole shtick is that I don't try and boast about the quote-unquote achievements or success, whatever you want to look at it. It's more the fact that if I can do it, then so can the average American. Like, I'm not a special case. I came here with limited funds. I knew no one. I didn't have a job. I was moving to a new country to chase a girl, and I put one foot in front of the other. But what I was good at was pushing my boundaries, right, and not focusing on the outcomes or the failures of those of making certain decisions, like leaving Australia and moving halfway across the world, or like buying my first property, but being okay with the fact that I knew that I wouldn't regret the decision in 70 or in 60 years' time when I was 80 years of age. So that's what really resonates with me, and that's what really makes me my drive. And over the last 8 years, I've continued to push those boundaries, and over time, it's snowballed into this incredible company that I've created with my business partner Andrew Campbell at Wildhorn Captial, and we now have a bit over 2,000 units, about $250 million assets under management, and a podcast, got a couple of books. So, and that's all not to boast. Again, it's been a lot of freaking hard work, but it's the ability to show that a guy from halfway across the world can come here and make it happen. So yeah.
Yeah. And don't worry about boasting, man. Like you need to share the story, get everyone excited, all that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of interested though. What do you think is the biggest difference between maybe investing in real estate in Australia? And then, I mean, there's still probably many different markets in America in comparison to Australia. Not to say that maybe there aren't a lot of different markets in Australia, but can you kind of clue us in on maybe some of the differences and what you kind of see as maybe the most differing challenges too?
Sure. So I've talked a lot about this on many different shows. So think of Australia and mainland America, excluding Alaska, give or take, they're roughly the same land mass, right? However, Australia, we can only inhabit 20% of our land because the rest of it is desert. It's an arid country, and so everyone's forced on the coast. In saying that, we also only have about 24, 25 million people. We have not even 1/10 of the population of what you guys have. So you have the same land mass as us, but you can inhabit north, south, east, west, and you have over 350 million people here. So with that, there's this drive for secondary and tertiary markets. People move around the country and create these markets, and that is not what we have in Australia. We have, as I mentioned earlier, think of LA, New York, San Francisco, high appreciation markets, high demand, low supply, because we're defined to the coast, and that is, and the lack of, and the population, and through small population, we don't have nearly the same financing vehicles that you have here in the United States, like 30-year fixed personal loans to buy houses backed by Freddie and Fannie. We don't have that in Australia. We don't even have multifamily in Australia like you do see here. So large-scale garden-style apartments, you can't just buy that in Australia. So in Australia, we have a rent to sell, so a condo model, and that's because the financing arm of that in Australia is that we only have 4 major banks, and they want to see, before they finance a development project or a block of apartments, the developer needs to sell X amount of those apartments off the plan before they will then come and fund the deal. So thus, you go down a condominium route rather than a build to rent model. So just in that saying there, when I first came here and saw that multifamily was a thing, and yes, small multifamily is a thing in Australia, but not, again, coupled with the financing piece, the very attractive financing, the commercial financing aspect, where they value these commercial assets on based like a business on their NOI, and they look more at the asset rather than the borrower. That would just blew my mind, coupled with multifamily, coupled with these secondary, tertiary markets, and a lot lower barriers to entry in those markets compared to where I'm from. Again, think of that, the high barriers to entry in the LA or the San Francisco or the New York markets. And so coupled with all those things is the real difference between the two countries. And really, that's what my superpower is, and what I'm boasting again, is my ability to have that outsider perspective. And maybe the average American who doesn't know what they have in their backyard, it takes someone like me to say, hey, you've got some pretty freaking awesome stuff here. Get off the fence and get going. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So do you feel that a lot of Australians then go to the American markets because there are, or is it still
local?
No,
it's still local. Like, we have the same, everywhere around the world, you have complacency, right? People are complacent. They invest in their backyard. They may or may not get out of their day job. You know, America is very similar to Australia and vice versa in terms of the average mindset, right? I've got my job and I'm pretty cool, just cruising along, and I don't want to do anything crazy. And my dad told me this, or my grandpa said this. So we have that syndrome in Australia as well. And it's very much I think I remember learning when I first started going to being educated in Australia, that if you own 3 investment properties in Australia, like, you're in the top 5% of investors. Like, But again, you got to remember the barriers. The average household in Australia would probably cost you $500,000. You know what I mean? Like, you're not buying something for 150. Right. So, and cash flow isn't a thing in Australia. You're all negatively geared. So it's all like, if you don't know what negative gearing is, it means that the money you put into the property, including interest rates, would be reduced from your income. So if you had $100,000 income from your W-2 job, and you had a rental property that you had to pour $20,000 into that property, whether it's through mortgage payments or repairs and maintenance, then you could reduce your $100,000 income to $80,000 and only be taxed on $80,000. That's what negatively gearing means, and that's more of the Australian mindset of where here you talk about the cash flow. And from my perspective, the US, out of all the Western countries in the world, is the best for financing commercial assets and cash flow. Full stop. You won't find what you can find here in, say, Europe or as prevalent as in Europe or London or Australia or Canada. So, yeah.
And you know that to basically, again, the tertiary, secondary markets, and then, of course, in combination with the financing, right?
Population, yep, financing, and obviously the capitalism ego that you get here in America compared to some other countries around the world. So, yeah.
For sure. So you did some deals starting out in New York. Obviously, right now you're over in California. So what's kind of the story? You just hustled straight out for 6 to 8 months, years, and whatnot. Started Wildhorn Capital, and then kind of started moving assets and doing everything else. What kind of markets did you start off with then? Maybe apart from New York, or maybe tell us a story of how you kind of.
Yes. So when I say New York, it was upstate New York, right? It was a Syracuse University. So it was in Syracuse, MSA. And the only reason I chose it was cheap, and I could get on a Greyhound bus from New York City because I didn't have a car, and I could get up there in 4 hours. I'd get on a 7 a.m. Greyhound bus on Saturday, get up there, have 2 hours looking at properties, get back on the Greyhound bus, and be back in New York City for a couple of beers with the boys on Saturday night. So that was really all it was. And it was, what was that?
It sounds like a perfect day.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing was I was just blown away. I bought my first property, $38,000 for a triplex back in 2012. Now, this fresh-eyed, bushy-tailed Australian figured out what the hell a ghetto was, right? And what Section 8 housing was, and all those sorts of things. And I not learned the hard way, but I had issues with that first property. I had a drive-by shooting. The reason they're so cheap is for a reason, right? Now, but I didn't spend, but that money I bought that first house, which was my own money, right? I didn't get any financing on it because no banks would lend to me because I was fresh off the boat. But I bought it all cash. It was my money. It was my money to lose. But it was I still vividly remember, Andre, sitting in the subway, reading a book. And this is 2012, remember, I've been self-educating for about 2.5 years at this point. So I got that analysis paralysis stage. I was like, I need to get in the freaking deep end. You're not going to ever learn about anything without doing it. It's like going to the gym, right? You don't lose weight by reading about it. You open the door, you get on the treadmill. So that's the same adage that I had. I was like, you already moved halfway across the world. You got to bloody go, mate. You've got these opportunities here that Rich Dad Poor Dad talks about, that creating cash flow. Go and give it a crack. You learned about it. You've learned enough about it. Now start taking action, and that's the biggest thing. Because for all your listeners out there, it's not about the amount of money you make on your first deal. It's about getting your foot in the door and getting a run on the board. And you may net zero, you may lose a little bit, but you've got started, and you give yourself permission to say, well, I can do this, right? And that's the most powerful thing, because you don't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. So what was kind of the key motivator then that actually pushed you? You just had enough of it, enough analysis paralysis, and just got after it. Yeah.
And it was just more to do going to those rear events, meeting other people, saying, hey, I'm looking at this stuff up in New York City, up in Syracuse. You should come up with me. I'm checking out. Oh, I'm interested. That's interesting. I could afford that. Okay, that's really interesting. So it was just through conversations, through going to those rear events, which was so critical in my growth here, because it was literally within 2 weeks of going fresh off the boat, I was at one. Yeah. And it was like, wow, look at this incredible community that has been created that is readily available to anyone. You can walk off the street and pay $20 at the door. It's like, this is pretty freaking valuable. And that's what started it. So you surround yourself with other people who shared ideas with me, planted little seeds of ideas, and that grew to something more, so it's all that type of stuff. And then eventually you're just like, well, let's go execute, So, yeah.
Sure thing. Yeah. Do you still have that triplex?
No, I do not.
Sold that off. Yeah.
Sold it off. But it got me to the second. I got a second duplex up there, and that duplex got me to flipping a house in Philadelphia, and that then got me to having conversations about syndication and getting into starting my podcast and trying to raise capital. So it's all those sort of good things. So there's a fly. It was all a stepping stone, right? You want to get to some future goal or target, you've got to break it down and say, what's step number one? And that might be as simple as going to a real estate area. It might be as simple as getting on a Greyhound bus and calling some brokers and seeing if they can take you on some tours. That's where it starts from.
Yeah, for sure. So at what point in time did you think, hey, I'm going to own 2,000 units, I want to start doing syndication? So you went for a triplex, and then did you think that you wanted to scale up right away, or what was the decision-making process behind that?
So two things I'll say to that is, André, one is I never had a dream at all to own the company I own today, and that we're going to go double this portfolio in the next 2 or 3 years. And what it really, looking back on the last 10 years since I picked up the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, it really goes to the fact that you can overestimate what you can achieve in a year, but you can underestimate what you can achieve in a decade. And I had no expectations of doing what I've achieved. And for me, it sends shivers down my spine, but it's also really rewarding. But it reminds me that the next 10 years, I don't care where I am at 44. I just know that I'm going to enjoy the freaking journey, because the last 10 years have been bloody awesome. You know what I mean? So then there's that side of it. The second, you ask how I got involved, it was more through a conversation with a very good friend of mine. End of 2013, I'm sitting in New York City. I've got a couple of little houses upstate New York. I'm looking at some flips in Philadelphia. Still working, I was only earning like 65 grand a year at a little structural engineering firm in New York City. Wasn't earning a lot. And my buddy of mine came down from Canada, and I said, I'm boasting. Look at these little properties I've got. I've got, $1,000 a month in cash flow. Some what wasn't nominal, but it was some amount. Yeah. And he's like, oh man, it's so cool. And he goes on to tell me, he's like, I closed on a 70 unit. And I said, what, 70, like 70? He's like, yeah, 70. I was like, how the hell did you do that? And again, through these conversations, then it's like, well, if he can do it, why can't I do it? And he told me about OPM, which I already know about, like other people's money. He spoke about seller carryback finance. He talked about a mentor, and all these things were in my brain that I knew I had to do. But up until that point, I'd only just been doing it on my own back, my own skin, my own, pocket, all that sort of good stuff. And I consciously made a decision at the beginning to go spend that $38,000 to buy a house rather than go spend it on a mentor, because I knew I would learn a lot more through buying one and doing one than a mentor. But I did know eventually I would need a mentor if I'm going to really scale. And that's when I sold those properties. And that's when I said, okay, if Scott can do it, I can do it. Let's go find a mentor. Let's liquidate some of these properties, have a little bit of cash, and let's go give this a crack. And from there, it was a long process, a slog of creating content online and creating a brand and creating something that people would want to listen to in order to share my story with folks. Because the fact is, I was only going to get investors because people like my story, they liked who I am. And that's ultimately, anyone will only invest with you because they'll only invest with you if they like you, they like your story, if they trust you. The sort of the deal is secondary. And it's really important to have that base of investors, and you've got to start from somewhere. And I'm a structural engineer. I have a very much black and white brain. I didn't know anything about creating a podcast or creating, a brand. And that's where my mentor helped me, give me the permission to take another bet on myself and say, hey, I'm going to go pay this mentor some money, and I better take his advice seriously, because I'm parting ways with this money. Now, it wasn't a lot. It's a relatively large sum. It's, depending on where you are, it was $2,500, but it was a large to me at the time. But again, it gave me the permission to say, you're worth it, and you can go off and scale. And that's where it started. And from there, I relocated to Los Angeles, and I wasn't, spinning a lot of plates, trying to keep, relationships, and trying to do side hustles and trying to find deals and underwrite deals, but trying to work full time at the same time. And I said to myself, well, if I've got to stay in a W-2 or a corporate world for the next couple of years, because I knew I wasn't breaking out anytime soon, and coupled with that, Andre, that I had to have a visa tied to an employer to stay in the country.
Right, for sure.
So I said to myself, well, I've got a structural engineering background, I've got a project management background. I'm sure a developer here in LA is going to find that valuable. And I just reached out to a bunch of them through projects I was working on as a structural engineer. And one of them said, hey, my wife's Australian, I love your story. Come in, let's interview. And through that, I went and worked for one of the bigger developers in Los Angeles. And I worked for them with nearly 4 years. And that was a way to be surrounded by real estate investing 24/7. Wow. And that was again, another realization that if I'm going to be in this game, I need to create part of my DNA. I need it to be surrounded all the time, not just on the side or on weekends and after work, right? I needed to be in the belly of the beast, learning from the best of the biz about real estate development. Obviously, I've gone off to create a syndication company, but ultimately, I know I'll be back in development someday in the future. You only start with syndications and cash flowing assets to build a base to then go off and do bigger and sexier deals. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yes. So what does the future look like for you, Reed?
Well, I mentioned before, COVID's hit, and we're all sort of, trying to navigate the water, but we are trying to double the portfolio in the next 2 to 3 years. We're 2,000 units. We're trying to get to between 4,000 and 5,000 units. We are a company, my business partner and I, Andrew, are very aligned on, we never want to be 20,000 units. We want to be a sustainable company. We want to grow at a sustainable pace. So that's maybe doing a deal a quarter, right? And that's, we never want to, we joke all the time. If we get to a point where we need a HR manager, we're done growing. We want 5 to 6 employees and a 4,000 to 5,000 unit portfolio. That may look like we bring property management in house at some point, become more vertically integrated. But we're now building something from scratch. And right now it's he and I. We just brought on a new partner. We've got an executive assistant. We've got a couple underwriters. It's pretty lean, but we're scrappy, and that's the way we like to do it. That's how you build businesses from being scrappy. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And not only that, but it really aligns with your story early on. Really didn't have much coming over to New York, just found your way. Hey, start, kind of buying properties that probably use a lot of work or maybe a lot of headaches, along the way. And it's just kind of all aligned. So yeah, that's great, man. That's great. Yep. So for people that are kind of stuck in that, that moment where you were, hey, this guy just bought 70 units, and he's telling me I should find a mentor, all that kind of stuff. For people that are kind of right there, like kind of still in the beginning, trying to understand what they're looking for, all this kind of stuff, what kind of advice would you have for them for either like looking for a mentor or how to think about what direction they should go?
Yeah, look, and I think you can hear in the story there is learning to push those boundaries all the time. And when you start to push, being surrounded, and it sounds as cliche it truly is around people you hang around with. Like my mate Scott, who I had no idea was even in real estate, he was doing this stuff. I already held him as a high self-esteem. I held him at a high esteem because he was a good mate of mine. And then he tells me he's done this awesome thing. I was like, he just raised the bar. Like I've got to meet it. Like again, he was a good friend. He's been a good friend for years. And so when other people around you are doing that type of stuff, you're like, okay, I need to up my game. And so that when you're in that environment, you then, and even it could be just one other person, right? You aspire to be. You then listen to what they are doing and try and apply it to yourself. And I already knew. Remember, André, when I was sitting talking to him, there was a little voice inside me. You need a mentor. Like you're getting to the end of your tether here. You need to really make this ship fly. You need to go and have someone to be a sounding board. And again, I found someone who'd only done one deal, but it was it was enough to, I'm going to pay someone, and I'm worth investing in myself to get a mentor. And that's the mental clarity I needed through seeing someone else that was very close to me do it and be successful, for me to say, hey, I'm worth this, and I'm ready to go take that next step. So that's the most important thing. And it's just about putting one foot in front of the other. Like so many people focus on, I need to be financially free in 2 years or 6 months or whatever it is. It took me nearly 8 years or 7.5 years to get to financial freedom, where I was about to quit between picking the book up, Rich Dad Poor Dad, between the day I could quit my job here in the States. And also I got a green card, so I married. But what I'm trying to get at is that so many people give up. And I'm the same way. I wanted to happen yesterday, right? I compare myself to everyone else, but you got to run your own race. And it's really important that if you have the right mindset on the front end, like if you think it's going to take you 2 years, and it may take you 2 years, maybe a freak and you get out in 2 years, great. But it's probably more than likely going to take the rest of us, the average person, between 5 to 10 years. If you have that mindset going into this, you know it's a marathon, not a race, and you won't give up after the end of 2 years and say, "Oh, it hasn't worked. I'm going to try something else."
Yeah, it's real estate.
It's real estate. It's the consistency of doing whatever you start, whether it's podcasting, whether it's talking to investors, whether it's building your brand. It will take time. That overnight success that's been happening for 10 years, well, it's all those hours that people don't realize that you've been building towards this. And that's so many people give up on stuff because they just come into this business, and any business that is, including like losing weight, the analogy I used before, it takes time, right? There's no magic wand, there's no silver bullet. It's just doing consistent work over a long period of time that will eventually pay dividends and massive results.
Phenomenal. That's awesome. So Reed, what does it look like for, a normal day in your life right now that you're doing you're kind of multifaceted here. You're doing a good amount of podcasting. You got books right now. You're doing capital raising and syndication and everything like that. How do you best use your time, and how do you best make sure that you're, consistently hitting it? I would imagine like small victories every day and handling so much, for when people do get to that level.
Sure. So the big thing for me is time blocking. So podcasting I only do on Fridays, whether it be my podcast or someone else's, I only do it on Fridays. Sometimes I sneak into Thursdays, but that's towards the end of the week, knowing that Thursdays and Fridays, the week slows down. It's like the wave. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays is all the stuff. It's all the business. And Thursday, Fridays, I can do about podcasting. I'm very, very into making sure my mornings are sacred to me, and that I have time to have clear meditation practices to set my day up for success. When I don't do it, I become very grumpy, and if I look too quickly at my phone, which we always want to, it's about taking that time in the morning. So that's really important. And then defining the tasks in my business that are really going to move the needle. And I define them by 3 different ways, Andre. I've got black time, I've got blue time, and I've got red time. Black time is this type of stuff, podcasting, CEO driving, outward-facing activities. Like where's the North Star? How are we going to get thinking about how are we going to get the ship to that North Star, right? Mm-hmm. Content creation, all that sort of stuff. And it also, from a personal point of view, spending time with the wife, going to the gym, meditating, doing things that I enjoy. That's all in the black time because it makes me feel freaking good. Mm-hmm. The blue time is like manufacturing. So think like a manufacturing plant. It's the business. You need to be the manager of that, but you don't need to be on the line itself, assembling the car parts, putting it together. You need to be overseeing it, being a puppeteer. So that's like property management, asset management, underwriting. All those stuff go into the blue time. And then we've got the red time, which is all administration work that I need to oversee a little bit of it, like administration and bookkeeping, but I don't want to be spending any time in that time at all. And ideally, you want to get to a 50-50 with blue and red, or even 70-30 with blue and black, with black being the most part. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, when you're a solo entrepreneur, it might be 30% real, 40% red, and 40% blue, and like only 20% black. But over time, you want that black to keep growing. And that's where you build your systems. That's where you build your employees. That's where you realize where you're the bottleneck and what your skill set is and is not, and hiring for that skill set. And it's little simple things like, I hate cleaning the house. I'll pay someone $100 every 2 weeks to clean the house. You know what I mean? Like, so I can have that mental clarity to not have to worry about that. And so these are little, like, the first thing I remember doing when I still had a W-2 job was when I was underwriting all these deals in Texas. I knew I was a bottleneck. I couldn't do my job well and try and underwrite deals on the side. I was just getting burnt out. So I went and hired 2 undergrads from USC for $15 an hour, and they did it. And I taught them the way, and that was my first little quote unquote hire. And I could underwrite 2 or 3 deals a week each, and it cost me $30 an hour. You know what I mean? Like that's brilliant use of my time that they can go do it, and it enabled me to learn how to be a better manager of people. And it freed up my time to, again, go have that mental clarity to go, instead of reacting to fires and keep sort of with the blinkers on, go, and egg beating and all this energy, but not actually going anywhere, and looking up and saying, okay, well, now that's been taken care of, I can now start to look towards the North Star, and where am I headed, and how do I direct the ship towards that area?
Yeah, wonderful. I would imagine as you were, kind of like leveraging yourself out of, the blue and the red time and getting yourself into that black time, I would imagine that your thoughts of, taking on a partner or that company the company vision started pulling together and whatnot. Yeah,
exactly.
So what were the challenges then, kind of taking that next step up for partnering with people? And then I would imagine that's how kind of Wildhorn Captial started, correct?
Yes, and I had partners on a flip house in Philly. I had a partner, just didn't work out. And looking back on it, you start listening to your intuition, your gut. And I knew on some of the existing other quote unquote partnerships I had, they were average at best, but it was like I was getting involved in deals, and it was just like doing anything to get involved in deals. But over time, you realize to start listening more to your gut. With Andrew and I, we have complementary skill sets. He has a skill set that he is in Austin, Texas, and I am not. That's something that I did not have, and that's something where I was coming up short and trying to win deals because I didn't have those relationships. But he doesn't like the details. Like, he's not the sort of, I've got that engineering brain. I want to break things and put them back together again, And so he's, it was very much a yin and yang process. He was a hustler like I was, but he also had a complementary skill set and was able to take things off my plate as I was able to take things off his plate. And that is really where you start to scale. But I couldn't have started realizing that until I hired those two undergrads from USC, right? I hired them before I even met Andrew, because I knew I needed to get out of my own bloody way. So really, when you're looking for a partner, that is the start of really to scale, because there's a lot of hats to be worn in this business. You don't have to wear all of them, and you don't have to be a master of all of them. You can have other business partners that are good at those aspects: underwriting, property management, asset management, finding deals, raising capital, all these different skill sets that are needed. You want to be dangerous in all of them, so you know what to do, but maybe not a master at one of them. Maybe you just don't like raising capital. You don't have the energy to do it, but you're really good at the number crunching, or running the deals day by day. That is a skill that you can lean into and find someone else to do the other parts of the business. So it's really important to have complementary skill sets and be that yin and yang when you do look to partner up with someone.
Fantastic advice. And a lot of things to consider, of course, as people are scaling or just even thinking about the future, even as a beginner, these are good things to, of course, not right away, but, to have out there and start thinking about and whatnot. So
exactly.
That's awesome. So for books and whatnot, you've written 2, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. Like, I'm more than happy to. So really, the first book, it's called Investing in the US, The Ultimate Guide to US Real Estate, is my podcast is called Investing in the US. So it was recreating content that I've already created into different formats. And it was taken from audio format into book format. And it was just taking the best episodes that I thought were really good from a starting point of view and putting it into a step-by-step chapter for about, I think, 12 chapters. Really from learning about investing lingo here in the United States, understanding how to create your team, choosing markets, understanding the 1031 exchange phenomenon, syndication, all this stuff that I was learning and doing through my podcast, and then and that content was already created to then transform that into written content and interweave my story throughout the chapters, so it just didn't read like a math textbook. And that was the start of that first book, and again, using other mediums to get the message out there. So that was the first one, and that launched 2 years ago, and it got to #1 on Amazon in a couple of different categories. And I just launched on Audible. So if you're an Audible listener, you can definitely jump on there and audible.com and find it. The second book is called 10,000 Miles to the American Dream. And it actually is a collaboration through the podcast. Again, I had started meeting all these other Aussies who are out here. Like, Reed's an Aussie, you should talk to this other Aussie guy I know. And I met sort of 6 or 7 other Aussie blokes that were all out here who made the pilgrimage across the ditch to invest in real estate or start some element of real estate, or had achieved financial freedom through US real estate. And each chapter is our story. And we started as just a a bunch of Aussies getting on a monthly call because we were all Aussies and we were like-minded and we wanted to, have a bit of banter and, talk, maybe meet up once a year. We sort of live around the country. And that was back in 2014, I think we started. A couple of years later, we said, hey, do you want to write a book? And, it was taking all this time. We finally got here, but we all had a chapter. We've all achieved financial freedom through different ways of, different elements of real estate. Like there's one guy's in mobile home parks, another guy's in fix and flipping. I'm obviously multifamily. One guy moved out here to start a tech property management company in Silicon Valley. So that was this combination of our story of financial freedom, and we all have an individual chapter. And it's just another way to, again, increase exposure through telling a good story.
Wow, that's fantastic. And everyone can find that on Audible, I think, for the first book, and then of course on Amazon. And
yes, that's correct. So Investing in the US: The Ultimate Guide to US Real Estate, or 10,000 Miles to the American Dream.
And then if someone wanted to listen to your podcast, what was the name of that podcast again?
Investing in the US.
Investing in the US. That's wonderful. So if someone really liked your story, wanted to reach out to you for whatever reason, or even take a look at your company, Wildhorn Capital, how would they be able to do so?
Well, you can go to wildhorncap.com, that's the business side of it. But, if you want to reach out to me personally, you head over to reedgoossens.com. That's REEDGOOSSENS.com. The podcasts there, the books are there. There's links to my blog. You can also schedule a call with me if you want. And for any listeners, or any of your listeners, I should say, that are coming through LA and they want to hit me up and want to talk shop and grab a beer or grab a coffee, you can hit me up at info@reedgoossens.com.
That's wonderful. Any parting messages at all?
No, I think the big one is the advice that I've always been given by my dad was, a fool and their money are easily parted, and don't be a fool and get out there and start learning. And so I challenge everyone listening to the show. Now, in the time of COVID, it's pretty easy to attend networking events. I want everyone to attend at least 3 networking events in the next month and do those same networking events for the next 6 months. And I bet you'll start to surround yourself with people you aspire to be, and that will lift your game to take it to the next level.
Wise words, wise words. Well, thank you so much, Reed. Really appreciate your time in joining us today. Lots of people should definitely go check you out if they haven't already. Buy your books, listen to your podcasts, see what you're all about and everything like that. So again, thank you so much for your time, Reed.
Hey, thank you for having me on, and you're doing a cracking job. So thanks a lot.
Appreciate it, sir. Well, thank you everybody for joining in. See you next time.